Hi everybody, this is Zag. This is a very short presentation on some new lenses that we're going to be introducing very shortly. I'm going to run through the core varifocals and also the specialist lenses as well. We're looking to replace the 5 core varifocals that we have at the moment, the Eye-Sure, the Eye-Free, the Eye-Max, the Eye-Pro and the Eye-Design, with 3 new core varifocals and also a lens called the digital lens, which has been specifically designed and manufactured for patients wanting to use electronic devices such as laptops and phones and computers. It's a good opportunity to streamline the portfolio, so to offer 3 main lenses rather than 5. And it's really important to keep up with the market and to always be looking to produce new lenses, new designs, so that we can give the patients the best possible choice as well. We're going to make use of 2 new concepts. The very first one is digital ray path, and this allows us to really make a lens personalized. So we'll be able to have a look at whether a prescription is long-sighted, whether it's short-sighted, and also take into consideration the rotation of the eyeball. And it means that we can then move away from using the conventional linear geometrical method and using an advanced 3D model based on the different parameters using the software. And so we can take lots of different things into consideration, allowing us to give the widest fields of view by minimizing any distortions on the lens itself. And that's true not only for varifocals, but it's true for single vision lenses as well. So it's an incredibly personalized concept. We're also going to make use of something called Smart Add, which is a new concept, especially for lenses which are for electronic devices and for our relaxed lenses, the anti-fatigue lenses. They allow us to add more plus to the intermediate and bottom part of the lens, the reading area, and that helps to keep the eyes more relaxed as they're changing from looking at the near to distance and then back to intermediate and near, then back to distance again. And that helps to lower the symptoms of eye strains such as headaches and watery eyes and irritated eyes as well. So this Smart Add technology will be in the digital varifocal and also in the relaxed lenses, which are the anti-fatigue lenses. I'd like to take a moment or two just to discuss corridor lens because these are incredibly important at the point of dispensing, and I find that they are generally not particularly well understood. It's incredibly important during the lens consultation to ask the patient and ascertain what they actually require and ask a few questions about their lifestyle, because the choice of varifocal and the choice of corridor length will depend on that, on their lifestyle. So if you look at the illustration in the middle, it's a 14mm corridor, which means that it's 14mm from the fitting cross to the top of the reading area. We use 14mm as a regular because we find that it's a good balance between distance vision and then reading as well. So the patient will only have to make a small adjustment in order to bring the reading into play, and it's generally quite good on the intermediate as well. Should a patient not want to make any adjustment for reading and not any adjustment for the computer, we can compress the corridor even more by, if you look at the illustration on the left hand side, and use a 12mm. So within 12 millimeters from their fitting cross, they'll hit the top of the reading area. They'll still have the full 4mm for reading. So on a varifocal where the heights are 16, what that means is that they will have a full 4mm at the bottom, but the corridor going from full distance prescription down to the full reading prescription starting is only 12mm. And then if a patient doesn't really use any electronic devices, then we can just put them into a long corridor so long as the heights are 20 or above. That will mean that they will have a 16mm corridor as well as the 4mm for the reading. But by having a longer corridor, it means that they will have less aberrations and less blur on the side of the lens, so less swim effect and a wider field of view. So the regular will be the middle illustration, which is a 14mm corridor, but we can request a 12mm for patients that don't really want to have to lift their chin to bring the computer and the reading vision into play. And then we can also request a longer corridor, which is going to be the 16mm corridor which is the illustration on the right hand side. So just to bear in mind that the actual minimum fitting height is the corridor length plus the reading area, which we've put at 4 mm. I'm going to compare some corridor lengths here. So we've done 3 illustrations here, and so if you look at the corridor on the left hand side, which you could say is a long corridor, if you look at the actual animation first of all, so because the power is spread over a greater area from the distances you go down towards the reading, it's virtually a single vision lens at the top. There's very little distortion. And then as you come into the intermediate area, you've still got a reasonably wide area. And then when you look at, say, towards the phone, it's still quite wide for the reading as well. The downside of that lens, though, is that the reading area, which is the pink circle at the bottom, is quite low down. So the patient will then have to lift their chin a little bit in order to bring the reading area into play. And so therefore, if they have to lift their chin a little bit for the reading area, it means they also have to do the same for the intermediate as well. The 14 mm corridor, which is the illustration in the middle, is going to be our regular corridor. And so you can see that the pink circle is a little bit higher. So when looking at phones, for example, it's going to be very, very good. There's maybe a little bit of a head movement upwards, but it's not a great deal. The downside is that you've got a little bit more distortion on the distance area and a narrower intermediate area and a narrower reading area as well. Then on the right hand side, this is more of a compact varifocal. So the reading area has been lifted quite a lot. So there's absolutely no head movement when it comes to looking at a phone. There's no head movement when it comes to looking at a computer. However, you have got more distortions on the distance, and you've got a narrower field of view when it comes to the intermediate area and the reading area, which is why a patient may then get more swim effect. So in a nutshell, the longer the corridor, the less distortions on a lens, and therefore the wider field of view in every single zone, but you have to lift your chin a little bit to bring the reading into play because it's further down. However, if you use a shorter corridor, like a 12 mm corridor, there's virtually no head movement, but there's more oblique astigmatism and therefore distortions in the side of the lens, so the field of view is narrower, all for distance, intermediate, and for reading as well. I'm going to start off with the standard varifocal, which we've decided to call the i1. This replaces the iSure and the i3. Very good lens. You can see from the distortion areas on the left hand side, that's generally how a varifocal is. We've minimized the areas that are distorted to give a reasonably clear view in the distance. It's quite a nice reading area actually compared to most lenses that we've been able to produce, and so it's quite a balanced lens as well, and we can get it in various corridor lengths. So it's available in the 12 mm corridor, the 14 mm corridor, which will be the regular one, and then the 16 mm corridor, which we're going to class as the long corridor. The i2 is the replacement to the iMax. Very, very good lens. This is, if you notice the actual distortion areas, it's actually very, very soft, and it's an extra soft design that has been brought out really to reduce the swim effect massively compared to normal varifocals. And it's got good visual fields in all areas, and this lens makes use of the digital ray path technology as well. So there's point-to-point mapping on a 3D computerized model. And because it's an extra soft design, it's been specially designed for those that in the past have struggled to use varifocals. So this has been trialed by a few members of staff, and the results have been very, very positive. The i3 is the new premium lens that's been brought out to replace the iDesign. It's a fabulous lens with literally minimal swim in all directions. Very, very smooth lens as the power changes from the top right down to the bottom. Again, uses digital ray path technology. We can make it in lots of different corridors. Again, we're going to stick to the regular, which is the 14 mm corridor. It's a good balance between distance and reading, especially if patients use phones and laptops and computers. You can get it in a longer corridor, which is the 16 mm corridor. We're going to call that the long corridor. And then we're also going to make the lens available in a short corridor, which is going to be the 12 mm corridor, where everything is a wee bit more compressed. There will be literally no movement at all when it comes to VDUs. However, it's going to have a little bit more distortion. But if you have a look at the illustration, it's got virtually no distortion in the distance. A little bit narrower, obviously, when it comes to the intermediate, which it has to have, but you'll notice that the reading area is lovely and wide. The digital lens is a brand new lens that we've developed, and it's been brought out specifically for those that like to use electronic devices. So that's things like tablets and phones and laptops. And you'll notice from the illustration that maybe compared to the i3, which is a premium general purpose varifocal, this has a very, very wide reading area. This lens has got the widest reading area of any varifocal. The downside is that in order to give that little bit extra reading area, it's got a little bit more distortion when it comes to the distance area. There's a little bit of swim on the right and the left hand side. This lens is not necessarily a general purpose lens. You can see full distance. It's very good for distance, although not as good as the i3 for distance. But when it comes to intermediate, so computers, and when it comes to reading, so any devices, it's the widest reading varifocal. The ultra compact is a lens that we've introduced. It's a premium lens. It's very compressed, obviously. If you look at the illustration, you've got very, very good distance vision. The zones are quite narrow though, so we do fitting heights from 11 millimeters, and you will use this lens anything up to 15 millimeters. So you have got a full 4 millimeters of reading in there, and the corridor will be an 11 millimeter corridor if it's a 15 millimeter fitting height. However, you only use this lens if the fitting height is 15 millimeters or less. Whereas with all the other lenses, you're really looking for a minimum fitting height of 16 onwards. I'd like to talk a little bit about some specialist lenses as well. I'm going to start off with the iDesk. So we've decided to keep the portfolio with the iDesk and the iOffice. There are other types of occupational lenses we can use where we can set the distances further than, say, 2 meters, but then you get to a point where it then just becomes a general purpose varifocal. So there's two in particular. The iDesk should be most people's first choice option because this gives the widest field of view for intermediate and reading, which is the whole reason people have these. If somebody uses multiple screens at work, they're always going to struggle with any varifocal. Whereas with this lens, the iDesk, although they can't see distance in it because it's only set at 1.3 meters, it covers all their close work, and it's got a very, very wide intermediate and near area. And just so I make it really clear, there's no distance prescription in this lens, and the top of the lens is set at 1.3 meters. So it will be the patient's normal distance prescription plus half their reading ad. And so the minimum fitting height is 18 millimeters because then they've got a 14 millimeter corridor and then 4 millimeters for their reading. So they'll have full distance vision up till 1.3 meters, so full intermediate, and then they'll have the full reading power as well. The iOffice is set a little bit further away than the iDesk. So the iOffice is set at 2 meters rather than 1.3 meters, so a little bit further away. However, it means that the field of view is a little bit narrower for the intermediate and reading as well. It's still very, very good compared to a conventional varifocal, but it's a little bit narrower than what the iDesk is. The top of the lens is a prescription of the patient's distance prescription plus an extra half a diopter. And the minimum fitting height again is 18 millimeters, so that's 40 millimeter corridor and 4 millimeters of full reading area at the bottom of the lens. The iDrive has been designed really specifically just for driving. It's if you look at the illustration, it's got full single vision freeform power on the very top design, and it's fabulous for driving, very, very clear. And then when it comes to the intermediate area, which we class as then the dashboard, it's wider than any varifocal. So what you'll then find is that it's got a very wide area when it comes to the dashboard, but it only has 75% of the reading ad. So if somebody's a +2 ad, the lens only has a +150 ad at the very, very bottom. And so therefore the patient may not wish to use this as an everyday varifocal because they're never going to have 100% of the reading area. This lens obviously can be made as a transition, can be made as an extra active, which is much better because it works behind a windscreen. It can obviously be made as polarized as well. The iSport is a very popular lens because it's fabulous for outdoor events such as golf, tennis, walking, cycling. It's got the full distance prescription, and it's got full reading area at the bottom as well. We've had to narrow the intermediate area and narrow the reading area. However, it does have the full reading prescription in there, but it's very, very good for any sporting activities. Again, the lens is available with the various tints and transitions on it as well. This is a brand new lens. It's a digital bifocal, if you'd like to just have a look at the illustration here. So this is effectively an R-seg bifocal, let's just say like an R24. However, there is no line on the lens at all. It's a blended area, and there's no jump either. So with any bifocal, whether it's a D-seg or whether it's an R-seg, there will be a degree of jump in the image as we cross from the distance to the reading area. In this lens, there is no jump whatsoever. So aesthetically, it looks excellent, and in terms of the optics of the lens, thanks to the manufacture of it using digital ray path technology, the patient will go straight from the distance power through to the reading power with minimal disruption, because it's just a very small blended area. We have to measure this lens as a varifocal, so rather than as a bifocal, and so the minimum fitting height is going to be 15 millimeters. The Eye Relax is an anti-fatigue lens, massively popular now due to the use of digital screens. Anybody can have this lens, really. We actively encourage it for anybody, say from the age of about 20 onwards, that uses electronic screens, uses computers a lot. So whenever we're having to focus on things close up, it's a lot more intense for our eyes, and then our eyes have to adjust from reading to then distance and the various distances. And so the power distribution is varied right away across the bottom part of the lens, and so it does minimize the feelings of irritation and asthenopia symptoms such as tiredness in the eyes, watery eyes, headaches. We've done it in 4 different reading editions, and it's really more for the optometrist to then advise on which reading ad we should use. So we can start off on a 0.36 diopter on a Relax 1, and it runs up to a full 1 diopter on a Relax 4. In other words, there's absolutely no reason to make a varifocal unless the reading ad is +125 or +150 onwards. The very best single vision lens for vision is the freeform single vision lens, and the reason being is that with this particular lens we do heights on this lens. It's made using freeform technology, and so each eye is computed separately. It's an aspheric lens, it's an atoric lens, and it just gives the very best vision that you possibly can have. There is no other single vision lens like stock or Surface that has a level of vision that is anywhere near what this is. There's virtually no aberrations on this lens, and so it's much clearer, especially on the higher prescription, the high sills as well. And the binocular field is much clearer as well because the two eyes are mapped together.